Welcome to the Expanding Worlds podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Caldo. And welcome to another episode in the Technology Changing the Future series. This episode, my guest is Wendy Harkins Davis from Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation, or PATF. Now, before we go any further, let me explain why this episode is worth your time, even if you're nowhere near Pennsylvania. Solutions and stories are to be shared, and we're a community wherever we are, Pennsylvania or Melbourne, Australia, where I'm originally from. And I say that because as you go through this episode, it will become clear, I think, that this episode isn't just relevant to someone who lives in Pennsylvania. It's relevant to all of us. I'm sure you'll get genuine value from this episode. It will help you think about what's out there. It will give you ideas about where to look. In fact, after I listened to Wendy, I did some research to find out if there was something similar to PATF in the UK, and I found an organisation. Now, I can't endorse that on here, but if you drop me a message, I'm more than happy to share it with you individually. What I'd also urge you to do is check out the show notes, because I put links on there to all the resources that we talk about. And on the PATF website, there's so much great information. So yes, there are parts of this episode that are a bit more relevant if you live in Pennsylvania, or in fact in the US, because we do discuss federal funding sources, for example. But really, it's mostly about how technology is being used to enable our young people to live much more independent lives. But enough from me, let's hear from Wendy. Wendy, thank you very much for talking to me today. Can you just tell me a little bit about your background and then also what you do at PATF and, well, what PATF does?
Sure. Well, most importantly, I'm mom to 4 children. My husband, Evan, and I have 4 children. 2 were born with bilateral, moderate to profound hearing loss. And then my husband suffered sudden deafness about a decade ago, lost all of his hearing in his right ear. He was driving his car and her ear popped and it was dead silence, most likely from a viral attack. And he now has an implant. So all of a sudden, with Evan's hearing loss, we're a family of 6 and 50% of the family has hearing loss. So that really drove my interest and involvement in advocacy for the deaf and hard of hearing. And I actually was recruited to join the board of directors for Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation. So I joined the board. I was on the board for about 3 years when the CEO called me and said, "We love you on the board, but we really love to have you on staff." So they recruited me to join. I'm the director of marketing and outreach for PATF. PATF is the alternative finance program for assistive technology for Pennsylvania. And this is a program that was authorized under now the 21st Century Assistive Technology Act. So that is federal legislation. Every state may have an AFP. 3 programs were actually authorized under that act. So the Alternative Finance Program is one. Then the Assistive Technology Resource Center is the other organization that was authorized. They really help people to identify assistive technology. They have a learning library so people can trial assistive technology, things like an augmentative and alternative communication device. There's a lot of variances in that device, and people really need to trial them and to determine which device works best for them, which user interface fits best for them. So they provide devices for people to test and try out. And then they also have a reuse program so people can get assistive technology cheaper. And then the third entity, which is just as important, is a disability rights organization. So ours in Pennsylvania is Disability Rights Pennsylvania. And they really help with advocacy to make sure people are getting access to accommodations and assistive technology that they need.
So in terms of what PATF does, do people come to you and say, I need this technology, or how does that actually work?
So people come to us in all different ways. And one of the things that I always educate people about is there's no wrong phone call to us, because it all depends on their needs, on how they find us. For example, if someone contacts our Assistive Technology Resource Center, they test out a device, they figure out, this is the device that works for me. Now the next problem is, how do I get that device? And a lot of times these pieces of equipment are very expensive. Augmentative and alternative communication device could be a couple $1,000s. The ATRC should be referring to the Alternative Finance Program, or PATF, to assist that person in finding funding to get that device. We also help people with funding for adaptive vehicles. We also work very closely with our Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is a state department that helps people with disability to be employed. So they support individuals with disabilities. They'll actually purchase their assistive technology for them. In the example of an adapted vehicle, OVR will pay for the adaptations to the vehicle, but not for the chassis or the vehicle to be adapted. So frequently they're referring their clients to us to get funding for the vehicle that then OVR will pay to adapt. And so OVR is another one that refers a lot of people to us. So a lot of times it just depends, there are different ways that people find us.
When you first contacted me back and said you come on the podcast, you talked about some of the case studies that you had, and some of those were really also about people being in their own houses and being able to be more independent. Can you just talk about a little bit about some of that technology that you've had experience of and how that's helped give people more independence, change their lives?
So yes, there's a big initiative with helping people to live more independently. There are organizations throughout the country called Centers for Independent Living, where these organizations are helping people to be able to stay in their own homes or live independently. So home modifications is another thing that qualifies as assistive technology. So the definition that we use for assistive technology is based on the federal definition for assistive technology, which means that we do not have a definitive list of what is assistive technology. It all depends on what that person needs. So for me, a treadmill is not assistive technology, but we actually did help a gentleman get funding for a treadmill because he had MS and agoraphobia, and his primary care physician told him that he needed to get more exercise. And that was challenging because of his conditions. So he decided he wanted a treadmill. So we helped him with funding for a treadmill so that he could exercise in his own space. So for him, a treadmill qualified as assistive technology. Another great example is a fence. So for families caring for individuals who have elopement issues, a fence can make someone's home a safer place. So that person's not, running off, getting lost, running into the street, things like that. So home modifications and those kinds of fence, like a fence, those are all things that PATF can help with funding for. And then we have our Smart Homes Made Simple project, which was funded by a 4-year grant from the Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council. And they really wanted to promote how generic, off-the-shelf smart home technology can help people live more independently. So we developed a website and a guide that really helps people consider their options, sort of think outside the box on what smart home technology can do for them. For example, we have an assessment. One of the important pieces of this is to actually have someone go through a self-assessment to identify what areas, sort of like an occupational therapist goes through and looks at your activities of daily living. Where are the struggles? Where would you like to make something easier to do for you every day? And then having identified those areas, we look at what smart home technology could help. For example, if there's someone who has a lot of traffic in and out of their door with therapists, they have PTs, OTs, nurses. So Smart Lock is a great generic smart home technology piece of equipment that can help with keeping the home secure, but also facilitating access. So you don't have to worry about, did someone hear the doorbell? Did someone go open the door? Each therapist can have their own code so they can let themselves in. And if that person is no longer providing services at the home, you simply disable that code and maintain the security of the home. That's been a really exciting project with the smart home. And it's, the technology is it's getting cheaper and cheaper. So it's a great option for people to look at.
I mean, you mentioned before that some of the technology is very expensive. Do you think that is one of the issues, is access to accessibility, in the sense that what you're just saying there is that a lot of the technology that will help people, like a smart lock, is readily available on the high street and you can just go out and buy it and it's fairly cheap? Do you think that needs to change, that some of the other technology, when it becomes cheaper, that will enable more people to get access?
There's definitely things being developed, an augmentative and alternative communication device, for example, that you can now use like an app on an iPad. So that's a much less expensive option than a whole proprietary piece of equipment. The great thing about the iPad is if you get it for a child, they can use it for other things, not just for their communication device. So, yeah, I would love to see, some of this technology move more into like an app kind of scenario that we could use on generic devices like tablets and iPads. So yeah, it's really unfortunate. One of our board members has low vision, and she had identified a screen reader that worked well for her, met her needs, but it was expensive. And it took her a few months to save up the money to be able to purchase that device. That's a huge goal for us. We don't want people to have to wait to get the devices that they need to live more independently.
Is it there a connection really between people thinking things are too expensive?
Oh, definitely. So hearing aids. Our Medicare does not cover hearing aids. There is limited coverage under a lot of insurance policies, but hearing aids are expensive. And a lot of people realize that, and they don't even bother pursuing it because they're like, I don't want to spend a couple $1,000s on hearing aids. So number one phone call we get is for funding of hearing aids.
Is that one of the biggest challenges you have as an organisation, also the funding that you have to deal with to make sure that you can support people?
We are very fortunate. Pennsylvania is very fortunate. Our program is probably the top alternative finance program in the United States. And not every state has a program, unfortunately. I mean, the federal legislation created the opportunity for every state to have these programs, but not every state does. We're very fortunate to have a very robust program, and there are no waiting lists to come to us to get financial loans for assistive technology. Now, we have a dual certification. We're an alternative finance program for assistive technology, but then we are also a CDFI, which is a community development financial institution. So we're able to pull funds from different areas in order to provide these loans.
So you don't have a wait list. Is that because people don't know about you, or?
Well, it's always a challenge making people aware of what's available. And that's always an uphill battle. And the pandemic has certainly made it more challenging. There was a lot of knowledge loss during the pandemic. So organizations that we had worked very closely with, a few key people leave and all of a sudden no one knows you're out there. So, we're working really hard to get back out into the communities, remind people that we are a resource. But I think there's a lot of challenges. I mean, it's still a loan. It's not a grant. So people need to be able to repay the loan. And some people don't want that. They just want grants. Now, we do have a funding guide. It's called a Funding Your Assistive Technology Guide. In that guide, we have over 65 resources that people can apply to for grants. Some are just within the state of Pennsylvania, but some are also, national organizations. So we always help people look at what their other funding options are. So, we point them to other resources. Maybe it's something insurance should be covering. We also provide the guidance for grants. So loans for a lot of people is a last resort. They want to try not to have to take out a financial loan, but we're consumer driven. So we encounter situations where people don't want to go through that application process to get a grant or to apply to their insurance or get something through the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, because that can be a lengthy process. And they want it yesterday. So they can always choose to come to us, just get a financial loan. We can turn around about 2 weeks, which is important. If you think about someone with their employment, potentially, if they're not getting what they need, they could lose their employment.
Do you think sometimes as well, people themselves haven't realised what other things they need? You talked about going through the process of being assessed and everything being identified. I feel there's a lack of awareness of some of the technology. There's also,
definitely.
But I wonder as well whether that someone else coming in and talking to you saying, you seem to have an issue with that.
One of the things that we do, so when we get phone calls about people having difficulty with hearing, we'll ask them, are you having difficulty communicating on the phone? Because there is a federal program out there. It's run under the FCC, which is our federal communication organization. We have access to free phone captioning for people who are have difficulty hearing on the phone. So that's the phone, the service, and everything is provided at no cost by the federal government. So we make people aware that this is another resource for them. And a lot of times people just aren't even aware that that program exists. That's why I always say it's never a wrong phone call for someone to call us.
It sounds like there's a lot available, but it's not joined up thinking.
Yeah. It's funny the way these things evolve, because there's a federal program for the phone captioning, but there's also a state level program. So there's actually two programs out there, but we just usually refer people to the federal program because there's no income testing. anybody can apply for that. Whereas the state program involves income testing, it's a little bit more involved of a process. So sometimes there's multiple programs that are available to someone.
So I'm guessing that your advice would be to phone up anyway if you're in a situation where you think you need some form of technology and just ask the question.
Exactly. I mean, interestingly, this morning I was just checking some voicemails that we got on off hours, and one woman just called, "Do you have any assistive technology for someone who's low vision or blind?" I mean, think about how broad of a spectrum that is. Yeah, there's lots of options. And for that situation, what we're actually going to probably end up doing is referring them to our state assistive technology resource center, because they have all the devices and they can provide advice. They can provide devices for this individual to trial to figure out what works best for them. We say to them, when you figure out what you want, call us back when you're done that process, and we can help you figure out how you're actually going to get that device. Like we said so many times, the issue is the funding. How is someone going to afford to get that device or piece of equipment?
And it does sound like you do have options available for people. As you say, not everyone can afford to take a loan.
Yes, a number of organizations that we work with very frequently are Achieve a Family Trust is one that we work with frequently. They are able to give large grants. A lot of times they're helping people with their adapted vehicles. And then there are some that are more targeted to supporting people with specific disabilities. So the funding guide is a great resource, and we check that information every 6 months. It's available on our website for a PDF download. We make sure that the phone number is accurate, that the website is still accurate, that the organization still exists. We think that's a really important piece of the puzzle in making sure that people understand what their options are for funding their technology.
You mentioned to me that you also have videos and that kind of thing showing how people are using technology. Is that also an important thing so that other people can look and think, actually, I'd never thought of that?
Definitely. Yeah. I think it really broadens people's mindset. We just produced 4 new videos with a young lady named Alexa. She was born with cerebral palsy, and it's just amazing all the different smart home technology and assistive technology that they've integrated into her home. So yeah, I definitely advise people to check out those videos. The latest videos, we've actually interviewed Alexa, and she's explaining how she got into smart home technology and how she started small and then added new devices. She has automatic door openers. She has automatic blinds. She can lower and raise the blinds. And she doesn't just do it through voice command, which I encounter this a lot with our deaf community. That smart home stuff's not for me because I don't speak. But she uses her Alexa app on her phone to control a lot of her smart home technology. So you don't really need to voice commands in order to take advantage of smart home technology. A new video that we're producing that's exciting is with the gentleman, George. Now, both Alexa and George serve on our Smart Homes Advisory Council. George also has cerebral palsy. He uses an augmentative and alternative communication device. And he has programmed his Accent 1400 to do voice commands. So he can turn on and off his lights. He can access his television. So he just presses a button and will say, Alexa, turn on the TV, presses another button. Alexa, go to HDMI 1. And so that's a new video we're putting out there. And this is something, again, where people aren't thinking about the options. How can you do this? Well, here's an example of how you can do this. Yes, a person whose speech may be difficult to understand, maybe they don't speak at all, they can get access to smart home technology, and this is how you do it, and giving live real life story examples.
So do you think, is it companies that are going to push this, or do you think it's going to be the users that are going to push all these changes, or is it a combination of both? Because I wonder, when organizations see what their tech's being used for, maybe it sends them in a different direction than they might have been, because a lot of this technology isn't being specifically designed for accessibility, like a lot of the home tech, Alexa and those kind of things, other smart home providers are
right.
available. But do you think that's a sort of combination, as the more people use this? And I'm guessing what you also say there is OTs have an important role to play. But is that going to push forward, maybe making the technology more available to people?
It's interesting. I just recently heard that some studies shown a higher percentage of people using closed captioning than is representative of the deaf and hard of hearing community. So people without hearing loss are using captioning. It's interesting, the things that are either developed or driven by the disability community which then are adopted by mainstream users. Smart home technology, interesting. Alexa, who we did the videos with, she had a proprietary system at first in her house, which there were some struggles with that because if it broke down, it was difficult to get it fixed again. It was all proprietary software, proprietary hardware. And she discovered smart home technology and said to her dad, I want to check this out. I think I can use this. Her dad said, oh, that's just for playing around. That's just a fun thing. That's not going to really serve your purposes. So she drove her investment in smart home technology and showing her dad how this generic off-the-shelf technology was easier for her to use, easier for her to support. We asked her in the interview, what happens when something goes wrong? She said, well, because it's generic off-the-shelf, she can Google if she's having a certain problem, how do I fix this? But she said, in reality, most of the time, all I have to do is unplug and plug it back in again. So I think it's a mix of things that are driving this advancement in this area. As people get older, a lot of this adoption of new technology is with younger people, but I'm hoping as our aging population who's already been exposed to a lot of technology, we'll see a lot more adoption of this in our aging communities because it's a great tool to help people age in place.
Thank you very much, Wendy.
Sure thing.
Thanks for listening. I hope this episode gave you some ideas about what technology might be useful for your young person and some tips on where to start looking for more information. And don't forget to check out the links on the show notes. In the next episode, the topic will be around digital inclusion. As always, I'd love to hear your feedback. You can get in touch with me on email, deborah@expandingworlds.com, or send me a message. You can find me on Instagram @DeborahCaldo.